This video is brought to you by Nightingale, releasing February 20th on Steam in early access. Can you think of examples of real people in games? And I don't just mean actors or body scans of people made into characters. I mean actual, real-world people as characters or in-game portrayals of their real-world self. It actually happens a bit more often than you think. Kojima is one of the modern auteurs who loves inserting real-world people into his games. His art is, after all, inspired by real-world events. While originally conceived as just a cameo, Kojima's self-insertion into Metal Gear Solid 5 as the Intel team agent Hideo stands as a definitive authorship statement once Konami started removing Kojima's name off the box. In Death Stranding, one of the delivery outposts houses none other than former late-night TV host Conan O'Brien. It's tongue-in-cheek, with his real name not used, but that's actually him. Death Stranding explicitly references his time with audience members from 12 years ago. The Tonight Show with Conan is probably canon.
Yeah, my poop is a weapon too, yeah.
But the most important of the bunch is Naked Snake meeting former president of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, and receiving his codename, Big Boss, from him. Look, it's not just Kojima games either. Call of Duty necessitates the use of historical figures to tell some of their narratives. You can't make a Cold War game without, in some way, directly addressing heightening US and Soviet tensions in the Bay of Pigs invasion and inserting Fidel Castro. And indeed, Call of Duty Black Ops featured not just Castro as one of the primary historical figures, but also former US Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, former US President Richard Nixon, and some young senator trying to make a name for himself. What's his name again? Oh, yeah.
Kennedy. John F. Kennedy.
There are, of course, way more examples. Some we'll get into later, but for now, my point is that there's a reason real-world people appear as character versions of themselves in video games beyond a point-to-the-screen cameo we smile at and quickly move on from. Reasons to think about games on a deeper level. And sometimes, it even goes beyond people themselves, diving further into the realm of real-world texts, ripping characters to adapt and make real. Ones we can talk to and interact with, to break down the barriers between passing engagement into direct approachability and more provoking analysis. But we'll get there. For now, take a moment for a short rest. Breathe, relax, and check your inventory as we welcome you to the medium of interactive historical tourism through games. Welcome to Save Room. Nightingale is a co-op survival game set in 1889, alternate history Earth where magic has been introduced to humanity by the Fae, allowing them to prosper for hundreds of years until a cataclysmic event sets the stage for the game's narrative in motion. That's the pitch, but the interest lies with what developers Inflection Games chose for the main characters you meet along the way. Real-world historical figures and characters who in our world exist in books, are actual people in the world of Nightingale. It's a short list, insofar that at the time of writing, I've only met so many of the game's full list of characters throughout my time with the early access build, but one thing is clear. Nightingale is concerned beyond the aesthetics of gaslamp fantasy in its Victorian-era setting. They chose these characters to include in the game, after all. They're saying something with them, but what and why? Well, let's step back for a moment. Throughout the plays of William Shakespeare are characters of the fool. While they mostly serve the play for comedic purposes by telling jokes or poking fun at main characters, there's usually a bit more to them than initially let on. By the end of the play, the character of the fool, either through monologue or conversational lines, will deliver the theme of the play, often to the audience directly. But it's important to note that these characters are still, well, characters within their respective plays, and not just rhetorical devices. In Othello, it's the character of the clown that's the fool, who is also secretly Iago, one of the main characters. In King Lear, the fool is played by, fittingly, a character named the Fool. In Twelfth Night, the fool is Fest, who is the only character who remains on stage and delivers a closing monologue before exiting and curtains. But in Midsummer Night's Dream, the fool is played by Puck. Puck in the play is a fairy and servant of Fairy King Oberon. But in real-world academia, Puck's origin lies with Celtic mythology. He's a nature spirit and the harbinger of either good or bad fortune. Puck is complex, both in Shakespeare and mythology. That brings us back to Nightingale. After your initial character creation and subsequent establishing cinematic, you're thrust into your first Fey realm. It's the tutorial section, and your initial steps are to escape out of the cave you're in. Except, there's a voice ringing in your ear. Puck. Yeah, the same Puck from Shakespeare's play, and more likely mythology, is your guide as you journey out into the wilds. And, just like in Shakespeare's plays, Puck has a complexity to his character. He is not just the game's rhetorical device to learn how to put together a campfire, though he does teach you that, but carries his own surreptitious secret he's not letting us in on. In a preview put together by Inflection, the developers hint at this character complexity Puck holds close, towing the line between trustworthy guide and ulterior motive adversary. Of course, they didn't actually say outright Puck's significance in the overarching narrative. However, the inclusion of more real-world figures and characters from texts leads me to believe that there's something deeper at play. Just like the version of Puck we're familiar with in literature and history, so too is Nightingale's Puck mysterious. He's snide, speaking to us in a condescending, sometimes almost antagonistic manner. We're 5 minutes into the game, and here's this dude who seemingly doesn't care about humans, giving us cards stolen off the corpse of a fallen realmwalker somewhere out in the wilds. It's all a bit foreboding. Puck isn't the only character from real-world texts, however. He's actually not even the only character from A Midsummer Night's Dream, and mythology even. Oberon is mentioned early on, though his presence is set up for something larger as of now. Repeatedly in the opening hours of Nightingale are direct references to historical figures and characters from texts. Some are even in promotional material. In a desert biome waits Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who we know in our world from Mary Shelley's 1818 titular novel, but in the world of Nightingale exists as a real scientist. Famous journalist Nellie Bly, or real name Elizabeth Cochran Seaman, is an early main quest NPC. Bit more on her later. And the daughter of Lord Byron, mathematician, and world's first computer scientist, Ada Lovelace, exists somewhere out in the Feywilds for us to meet along our main narrative journey. Inflection could have chosen anyone. Hell, they could have populated the NPCs with fictitious characters they themselves made up. But they didn't. At the heart of Nightingale is a concern with a connection with humanity through the act of adventure. It's both explicit in some of Puck's texts and implicit through the means of characters. In other words, who and what they choose to include in the game. In the item description for paper is a direct reference to Jules Verne, creator of Voyages Extraordinaire and famous books like Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Around the World in 80 Days. That's how we know him in our world, though. In Nightingale, Verne is seemingly an explorer, just like us. Scratch that, better than us, even. Someone we can only hope to become. Sure, maybe all of Verne's same texts from our world exist in Nightingale, but in the game, they're autobiographical accounts. Real-world adventures someone actually went on and recounted to other realmwalkers. To inspire. Fittingly, Nellie Bly, who I mentioned earlier, then exists in this world too. After all, she completed her journey around the world in 72 days. And it's through these inclusions that Nightingale is able to reinforce its themes it's attempting to, well, explore. Adventure connects us. We feel our corporeal potential at seeing others achieve extraordinary feats of what we think possible. How Nightingale sets itself apart as a survival game is that it's engaging with this theme beyond the gameplay systems themselves and into a conceptual level. Humanity is the focus. After all, it's what Puck says is fundamental to realm exploration. Without humanity, you are unworthy, and it must be nurtured through adventure, through survival. The inclusion of historical figures and characters from literature is, I think, for one purpose: exposure. Developers want to share their direct inspirations by using people we're either only somewhat familiar with, or even better, not familiar with at all. Because it's important and provides an opportunity to learn about figures in contexts where we are directly engaging with them. The average teenager may be familiar with Leonardo da Vinci only by name,
Da Vinci?
But in 2009, if they played Assassin's Creed 2, could witness his prowess as an inventor. I'd wager less people are familiar with Nikola Tesla's fabled death beam or the weapon to end war. Shout out Oppenheimer again, didn't think I'd get 2 references in this video. Sorry, okay, back to Tesla. But those who played The Order 1886 could engage with the scientific prowess Tesla had as an inventor. Also, hi, you should play The Order. It's actually pretty good. And while hopefully most people should know how evil Hitler was, video games provide a means to engage with rejecting fascist movements beyond traditional historical lenses. An ingenious way to do this is through satire, as is with the case in Wolfenstein 3D, where players face Mecha Hitler, the dual machine gun wielding final boss players shoot until he turns to goo. It's absurd and over the top, but the point is easily made. Through the use of these characters, we've achieved approachability, breaking down barriers of engaging with our own history. And it starts with real-world figures. But sometimes, using the medium of games can make us miss the point. Okay, I'm sorry, but we gotta talk about Fortnite. On August 26th, 2021, Time, the news magazine, partnered with Epic Games to bring Martin Luther King Jr. to Fortnite. And no, not as a playable skin. Instead, Epic created the March Through Time event, an educational experience where players could not only hear Dr. King give his famous 1963 "I Have a Dream" speech, but walk the very steps of the Lincoln Memorial where the speech was delivered. And not only could we witness the speech in its entirety, 17 minutes played on loop, but tour exhibits to learn more about the civil rights movement. Producers of the event had aspirations that March Through Time could be used as a platform where, quote, parents, teachers, and others could use it to teach kids about a vital era in American history via a platform they find familiar and engaging, unquote. Simple enough. Makes sense, even. The issue is, of course, is that it's Fortnite. So naturally, the event was filled with skins like Master Chief hitting emotes at a venue you probably don't want people doing that in. It's a wild time to be on the internet that day. But perhaps more egregious was the gamification of the event. A trivia game at the event unlocks an in-game quest. You could skydive with 3 other players, run through a 2-person maze, and use the gravity ball to collect all the orbs of power. It's all somewhat strange. Actually, it's not even the only game to create weird dissonance by using King's speech and civil rights iconography. But anyway, one at a time. I teeter back and forth on how much of this was a good idea. On paper, bringing an iconic civil rights speech to probably the biggest platform in the world as a teachable moment is maybe, yeah, a good idea. Or at least an idea with good intentions. And platforms like Kahoot are used all the time in the classroom as a means to reinforce learning. As a former teacher, I use things just like this. including during our civil rights unit. Pedagogy tells us these things actually work to help students learn. And look, kids are always going to be distracted by something. They'll open their phones and scroll TikTok when they're supposed to be reading. They'll talk to their friend during a lesson. But the classroom allows the setting to minimize these distractions. Learning is at the center of focus. In Fortnite, though, maybe less so. Despite intentions from the producers, you run the risk of creating dissonance with players. Who cares what Dr. King is saying? Let me do a funny emote and complete my quest so I can go back to sending fools back to the lobby with my sniper. The subject fell victim to the medium. The learning failed. Dissonance. If you're interested in learning more about the overall weirdness of the March Through Time event, Polygon has a great write-up detailing that same dissonance of Epic trying to teach about Black history while capitalizing off stolen Black culture for financial gain. I'll link it down in the description. So what do? How do you bring historical figures into a game and avoid creating dissonance when players get their hands on the controller? It's simple. You give it the weight. You give it the space. You ground everything to meet it on its terms. You lean in. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 by Insomniac Games featured their own Black history tour through an in-game side mission. And while historical figures don't actually exist in contemporary New York, they are forefronted. As Miles, the Hardbop side mission culminates in the restoration of the Harlem Cultural Center. Here, you can walk around and learn about famous Black artists that formed the Harlem Renaissance in the 1930s. Miles talks about Charlie Parker, the jazz saxophonist who was instrumental in the development of bebop music. You can learn about Florence Mills, one of the most prolific leading performers of the jazz age, who was, at that time, known as the Queen of Happiness. And you can read the poetry from Langston Hughes, whose Weary Blues is presented in its entirety for us to read. Look, I know most players will probably skip a lot of this to get back to swinging and crime fighting. Looking for clips of the museum on YouTube nets you countless mission walkthrough videos with thousands of views, where the sole purpose is guiding players through the action. The actual museum, the literal culmination of the mission, is then breezed through and the video ends. Shout out to GWO for uploading a full exhibit tour, and I mean of only the museum, as a standalone video, with, at the time of writing, only 41 views. He's the one doing the important work. Spider-Man 2 avoids creating dissonance when learning about historical figures by giving them the weight. The museum is a slowed-down walking section of gameplay where Black characters are learning Black history and Black culture. And it's our job to engage with it. Figure out who Florence Mills was if we hadn't heard of her. Listen to Charlie Parker's music. Decode Hughes' Weary Blues. Nightingale functions similarly. Throughout every dialogue with NPCs, both historical figures and those characters pulled from texts, we as players are engaging with language that fits the aesthetic of the game. Puck is going to speak to us in a manner that's linguistically colorful and dense. And why wouldn't he? Dude's a freaking trickster, remember? But one that'll reinforce the themes Inflection wants us to chew on. And again, we harken back to approachability. Even if it's on the simplest levels. How many times do you see someone refer to Frankenstein as the big green monster? He's yellow in Shelley's text, by the way. Simply by playing a few hours of Nightingale and reaching the desert biome, meeting Victor Frankenstein will reinforce that he is indeed not the monster, literally, not thematically, but the scientist behind the creation. It's maybe a simple goal that including historical figures aims to achieve, one that is probably even unintentional at times. But I don't know. I think it's sort of cool. To be so inspired by people from our actual past and characters from books that they'll expand the ways we can engage with these characters outside of historical lenses or reading texts. To think that some people at Inflection found Puck so interestingly mischievous that they formed some kind of narrative around him in a survival game is something you just don't see. Something that's really only possible with the language of games. And it's this approachability and engaging with these figures that stands as the ultimate purpose for their inclusion. To talk to learn from, to engage with. All in the medium of games. And isn't that neat? Let me know what characters you think of. Like and subscribe.